podcasters. Today we're going to be talking about hot communication. So we're going to start with the story. It's about a guy named Les Steckel. And here's what he has to say. When I was hired as the new offensive coordinator of the Houston, Tennessee Oilers in 1997, so that's an NFL team that moved, I knew that we had a big challenge ahead. The Oilers had never made that exciting trip to the Super Bowl. So when the owners moved the team to Tennessee, it signaled a serious intention to reach new heights. We wanted to get to the Super Bowl. While at training camp that season, we discovered several effective principles for building a championship team. One of these guiding principles was communication. Most NFL summer training camps are hot. They're held outside. So we decided to use the weather to guide our communication and make sure it was hot as well. Honest, open, and transparent. Hot. Since one of our main challenges that year was convincing a group of people from all walks of life to lose themselves for the sake of one cause, our road to the Super Bowl, our communication had to be effective, and we called it hot. So that's Les Steckel talking about hot communication. So what is the H.O.T in hot communication? First, honest. The truth and nothing but the truth. Easier said than done. Open. Open mind, open heart. Transparent, visible, nothing hidden, no secrets. So we're going to talk about that because we know that CEOs, all of us, struggle with this notion of hot communication. So let's start by talking about honesty in the workplace. Honesty, the truth, and nothing but the truth. That's not always easy to deal with. I'm going to turn to Patsy Feeman, Patrick Lyons. They're here with us. Patsy, what have you seen that promotes sharing your truth in organizations? Maybe something that works, something that inhibits it, and any examples?
Well, when you're talking about honest communication, it makes me think of how I need to be honest with myself so I can be honest with you. So it starts with me.
Yep.
Then I'm nested within.
Great.
I'm nested within us, so our team, and then I need to be aware of the organization. So for me, all those three levels work simultaneously in any situation.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Honest with myself. Now you're starting to help me step up to the challenge. Right. Patrick, I know we talk about this. We talk about this a lot amongst ourselves. What comes to mind?
So when I think about honest communication, I'm reminded of something I learned 15 years ago in marriage classes. And I feel like so much of what I've learned in marriage classes is applicable in business. And I learned a long time ago that if I want honest, open communication from my wife, and I do, because I don't want to be surprised and find out someday that she's been unhappy for this extended period of time, right? But if I want that honest communication, then it's more than just asking for it. It's my responsibility to make sure that I'm creating the kind of environment where she can be honest with me, which means when I say, "Hey, how are we doing? Are you happy? What do you need more of? What am I doing that you want less of?" Or even if I'm not asking that question, if she just needs to bring something to me so that we can get back on the right path, it means I can't become defensive. It means I can't immediately try to explain away whatever I did that I wasn't supposed to do, or I can't make excuses. It means I certainly can't punish her for any reason for bringing that honesty to me. If I do, then what does she learn? She learns, it's really not safe for me to tell you what I need to tell you, and therefore I'm just going to withhold that. And that's kind of the beginning of the end of the relationship. The same is true in an organization. If you have an organization, if you, the CEO, if you've got an organization where there's not a lot of open communication, since we know that the single greatest impact on an organization is the senior leader, my question to you is, are you creating the kind of environment where people can say whatever needs to be said? Can they bring mistakes forward? Can they bring issues forward? Can they bring suggestions and ideas forward without fear of punishment in any kind of way? They're not getting yelled at. They're not getting removed from projects. They're not getting fired. So that's when I think about honesty in communications. It's one thing to ask people to be honest. I think it's far more important to make sure that I'm creating the kind of environment where they can be.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
great. Yeah. Environment, culture, and in this case, football team, 50, 60, 70 players, coaches. Um, that's a lot. And that's a lot for the head coach. That's a lot for the CEO. That's a lot to set up, right?
Mhm.
When I think of open communication, honest communication, I think one of the things that either can promote or inhibit honest communication is body language,
Totally.
right? You can shut people down or open people up. You can foster honest communication with being intentional or aware of at least your body language.
Yeah.
I can remember one person I was working with, a leader I was working with, who just really flashed his internal emotions through his face. And if somebody offered something that cut across the grain, but it was truthful for them, it was honest communication. Um, he would try to say the right thing, like the right response in words, but his face would say something different. And it literally also at times would change color. And everybody, it just honest communication became very difficult, at least in that particular moment or meeting. Um, Another thing I think of is how a CEO handles hierarchy. Is it the kind of thing where maybe at your level you can be honest with each other, but communicating up is much scarier? Or being honest, maybe, it only takes one example where somebody was honest and they got shut down badly.
Mhm.
And then, so or the other way around, somebody said something truthful that maybe took everybody off guard, and it was well received. It was listened to. Um, and then the last thing is that I ask myself is uh, am I welcoming different perspectives, right? Because those different perspectives, those different beliefs, those different truths may be something that only that person is uniquely spotting.
Mhm.
And you want the kind of environment where you can be honest. People can be honest.
I almost want to give the CEO, give our listener that phrase. Again, it's what I learned in marriage class was when my wife tells me something that I don't want to hear. Sometimes the best thing to say, or when your employee brings something to you, or a leader, anybody in the organization, or a customer for that matter, brings something to you
Mhm.
that may sting a little bit, or you may not necessarily agree with. Sometimes the best thing to say is simply, "Thank you for telling me that." And that's it. Just leave it right there. Thank you for telling me that. And occasionally I'll say, I don't know what to do with that. Let me think on it. Let me chew on it. Let me come back to you with something. But I just really appreciate you telling me that. Thank you. And that alone doesn't. I'm not committing to changing anything. I'm not locked into doing anything. But I'm just inviting more. It's like, you know what? And it is often in those quiet moments after the fact where you can think about it on your own and reflect on it and go, you know what, there really is some truth to that. And then those are the moments where I'm glad I didn't respond in the moment. I didn't try to explain, but just say, thank you for telling me that. And then I can come back the next day and say, I thought about it. Some of that I agree with, some of that I don't, or yeah, but just thank you for telling me that. Patsy.
Yeah, I mean, it acknowledges the other person. I mean, it is often scary to be honest, right? So if your honesty is met with rebuttal,
Mhm.
I think you were mentioning this a few minutes ago, Patrick, it doesn't make me inclined to want to speak up again.
Right.
This does remind me of a manufacturing company whose product at the time was up and coming and has now become a household utility, where they had a culture of listening honestly to everybody in the organization. And some of their most creative, innovative ideas came from their frontline workers. These salt of the earth people that were operating machines. And it made a significant difference in the end product because they were given the opportunity and encouragement to be honest about what wasn't, or was or wasn't working. It was so inspiring.
Great. That's great. So I think, if we pause here for a minute, just kind of break it down simply, we're asking people, CEOs, people in organizations, leaders, are you promoting or inhibiting honest communication? And what can you do to promote, and what can you do perhaps to course correct and stop inhibiting honest communication? Because we know how important it is. I was thinking about it then in the sports language. So I coached basketball for 7 years. And one of the things that we built into our culture, and one of the things I loved, is when uh, we would screw up, someone would screw up, whether it was a particular drawn out play or whatever the case may be, and they would own it. They would come back and, maybe the coach would call timeout and the kid would come back in and say, my bad, I completely missed that. It's honest, it's quick, we're on. There's no yelling and screaming. There's okay, don't do it again.
Yeah.
Let's get back out there.
The importance of that.
I don't see that in business. It's interesting. It's like I don't hear that. I don't hear people in business going, "My bad." Let's move on.
But what's fascinating about that in organizations where people can't bring their mistakes forward out of fear of getting hung out to dry or made an example of or fired, then the two things that happen, first of all, people start hiding their mistakes, right? And then you don't find out about things until like molehills have become mountains. And the other thing that happens is if people stop taking risks because they're afraid that if they make a mistake, and if the people in your organization are not taking risks, then innovation in your company dies. So, and it all comes back to, is it safe for me to be honest about, hey, I tried this and it didn't work? And it's that honest communication.
Yeah, it's so good. So now let's go to open, and it starts with open mind and being open minded. And obviously, one of the questions is, so how can you help yourself? And Patsy just said that just a moment ago. It starts with me, right? How can I help myself be open minded, or open my mind when I don't feel like it, or I don't like what I'm hearing? And what promotes being open minded? And then how do you avoid being or becoming closed minded, or a closed minded organization? I know there's a lot to say about that. So, I'll just use one example that comes to mind for me. I think we've all heard it. It's like somebody comes in with a new idea, and what they're met with is, they're in a meeting, and there's some people who have been there longer maybe than they have in that particular organization. And they say, oh, we tried that once and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Blam, door closed.
Yep.
Quite often. So let's talk about open-mindedness. What do you think of, Patsy?
There are two things that come to mind for me. One is to be curious.
That's great.
So curiosity promotes an open mind. And the other is to be a lifelong learner.
Yep. Yeah.
Because without those two, it is really easy to get stuck in a hardened mindset that doesn't really leave you open to other people's opinions.
Right.
Or new ideas like you're talking about.
So, when we think of that, Patsy, in terms of being consultants, and we see that curiosity is not alive, or we see that someone's speaking as if they've already learned everything they need to know to be successful. Um, what comes to mind? How do we help shift that, or help people see that, and help leaders, help CEOs see that? And Patrick, you feel free to jump in. We're just having a conversation here about this.
Well, first of all, when you start to see a lot of breakdowns in an organization
Mm-hmm.
where there isn't a lot of innovation, or people withdraw or blame, then that's the most common place I think we see CEOs wanting, that's where the frustration comes in, right? Is like, this isn't working, I'm frustrated, so how do I deal with that? That's probably the more common way I think we start to question, am I open-minded? But the more proactive way is to be intentional about harnessing those differences, welcoming different opinions, and creating an environment where people feel safe to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then everybody's learning together, then you appreciate differences. It's a very counterintuitive move in our work world, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does promote a lot of frustration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I would add to that. Sometimes there's an element of humility, right? In order to not stay close, or not allow myself to be closed-minded. Just having an element of humility to be able to recognize I don't know everything. I don't know everything. In fact, as the CEO, you can't know everything. You have to surround yourself with people that you trust, who you can hopefully create the kind of environment where they can tell you what's going on, and help fill the gaps in for you so that you can have a complete picture. But you just have to, there's an element of humility. I don't know everything, and therefore I'm going to remain open to the ideas and the suggestions and the whatever the updates are that I'm getting in the organization. And then there's almost a corollary to that, and that is, I almost want to give you, the CEO, permission to not have all the answers. Like, there's an expectation that as a CEO, you're supposed to know everything. I've even had CEO, or I've heard CEOs talk about how they like to rotate through every job in the company, and that's great. I mean, that's like, it's great to go learn as much as you can, right? Be a lifelong learner. But even so, the moment I think I've got it all figured out, it's kind of the beginning. Well, it's the beginning of closed-mindedness, and so just give yourself permission to not only in your own head say I don't know everything, but to even allow those words to pass through your lips to your team or the employees on the front line who ask you questions, and just say, you know what, I don't know the answer. What do you think? You're closer to it. What would you suggest? What would you have us do? And that alone, right? That just again, that action, you're inviting people into you're asking questions, and then listen and allow that to expand your own, be that lifelong learner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually Jim Collins, in his kind of classic business research in Good to Great, identifies both humility and our willingness to say, I don't have all the answers. It's two of the key characteristics that allows CEOs to take their organization from being a good organization to a great organization. So I really glad you reminded us of that, Patrick.
Yeah. I know for myself. So if I just apply this to myself, three things come to mind that help me. One is breathing. I literally, there's a physical element to remaining open-minded, and sometimes I literally do breathing exercises that aren't necessarily noticed by other people, but they help. Another thing is just giving space, um, and that can even show up in an agenda. You can really, you can have such a tight agenda that there's no room for open minds. And yeah, you complete the agenda, or you can you complete all the items on the agenda, but was there any room for a new idea? Was there any room for dialogue on a topic that might have opened it up further? So giving space, I think, is important. And, the last one for me is kind of, I guess it's in the field of emotional intelligence. I need to understand what my triggers are.
Mm.
So I don't, so when I'm triggered, I don't pull the trigger. It's like I find that very helpful. I kind of laugh about it at the moment, but you both know my wife. She's an incredibly curious person, and being an incredibly curious person, there are times when, I don't want to hear about the latest new homeopathic approach to, this thing or that thing, and or some new dietary thing, and but I love her, and I love her curiosity, and inspires me. So I work at it, and sometimes I'm breathing, sometimes I'm not pulling the trigger, and sometimes I'm giving space, um, and it helps. So let's go to open-heartedness.
Mm.
Open mind is probably in a business. There's a lot of headness. I don't know if that's a word, but there's a lot of heady stuff in business. But how about the hearty stuff? How do we get to open-hearted, and what does that mean to you in business? If we were live on the phone, I'd want to be asking you, what does that mean to you in business? I'll kick it off by just saying the first thing that comes to mind for me is just a willingness to show how much you care. Care about the business, how much you care about your people, how much you care perhaps about the community that your organization operates in, or so I'll leave it there, but I think caring has something to do with it.
Honestly,
I jump in.
Yeah, I don't even have anything to add. I just want to reinforce that and say, that's the saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And there's the data that suggests people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. And so then the opposite is true. They don't really stay at companies, they stay with leaders that they know care about them, and where they feel valued and trusted and empowered, and that kind of relationship. If I know that you care about me, then I'm going to be far more willing and apt to have a real open, honest, transparent conversation with you. So I just like echo what you're saying.
Yeah, open-hearted. Again, perhaps easier said than done. I think another thing about open-heartedness is that when you see it, say it kind of thing. There's a lot of unspoken appreciation for people. And, it always feels good to be recognized or acknowledged for doing something well. And to me, that's more of a heart thing than it is a head thing. I have to open my heart and open my mouth and get those words of appreciation, across the threshold of my lips, and actually say, Patsy, I really appreciate you, and maybe specifically for this or for that. And that open-heartedness also, I think, generates organizational vitality.
Yeah, and I think for the CEO who struggles with that honest conversation, like, we've been talking a lot about being open to receiving honest conversation. Sometimes as a leader, very often as a leader, you've got to have honest conversations with people in the organization where you might need more from them, right? There's a gap between what their performance is and what your expectations are, or what you need from them. And for leaders who struggle with having those difficult conversations, back to your point, Leb, those recognitions, those attaboys, if I catch people doing good and I'm reinforcing that, I'm just elevating people with my words, it gives me permission And it makes it easier to have some of those more difficult conversations. Like, I always say, if the only time people see you is when you've got bad news, or you've got something bad to say, they're not going to want to see you. So to your point, recognizing people, making sure that for every one constructive criticism, there are multiple times where you're catching people doing good and reinforcing the positive. It can very often make those difficult conversations easier for you to have, but also more well received by the person you need to have it with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think I think there's a myth that as leaders, as CEOs, you have to have it all together. You have to have all the answers, and emotions aren't okay. Yet when you look at a lot of the research, emotional intelligence and acknowledgement are two of the key ingredients that promotes better performance, more engagement, people really wanting to participate.
Yeah, that's so good. That's really true. So that takes us to transparent, the last letter in H.O.T, hot communication. Um, some of that is about making things visible, ensuring that there's nothing hidden in the kind of the context of secretive. And I'm going to tie it, just to kick us off, to what we were just talking about open-heartedness, because all three of us have worked with leaders of organizations who have struggled with being transparent and open-hearted about their emotions. And I can remember many times where someone said, oh, the worst thing that could happen in my mind. So now we go from mind, from head to heart to transparency, is to cry in a meeting. And, I can tell you, I have cried in meetings. I've been emotional in meetings. And yeah, there can be maybe repercussions for that, but a lot of them I found have been positive. It's like, oh, that person's human. That person has emotions. And it may be that what caused that to happen didn't happen at work. It's something else. But we're here together in this work environment. So it's visible. What works for you? What have we seen that works? What have we seen that, may work against you when it comes to being transparent and visible? I'll offer one other is we intentionally chose to get masterful around simplified strategic planning so that the bulk of the strategic plan can be shared with everyone in the organization. It's transparent, and the objectives and the metrics are transparent, and you actually know what your contribution to the organization means. I hold that in the context of intentional transparency.
Yeah, when I think about transparency, um, another place that shows up, I was alluding to it earlier, is having those difficult conversations about the gap between someone's performance and my expectation, like what I need from that person. And I hear it a lot from leaders, CEOs, who feel like, I don't want to, those are hard conversations to have, and I don't want to. We fear having them, but I feel like hot communication, everything we're talking about, Leb, honest, open, right? Open heart, having that, and then transparent conversation. I usually I will counsel that leader to say that open, honest, transparent performance discussion that you are having with that employee is probably the greatest gift you can give any one of your people. It's more important than their paycheck, because if the performance doesn't improve, their paycheck is at risk. So if I can if I can have that open, honest conversation with you, and
So we're picking it up again here. We had a little internet problem. And what we were saying is that in terms of transparency, there's at least a couple of things that come to mind for us about what can work against you and or for you. And one of those is social media. So I think it's relatively new. It is so widespread and so transparent. And obviously, then we all have examples of where social media has caught people by surprise or worked against you as opposed to worked for you, even if the intention was this is going to work for me. So I'll give one quick example. We work with an organization and in the Midwest, and they were very excited and proud. They, kind of a best place to work. And they posted a picture of, everyone in the company in front of the building, and people were smiling. And some people blasted them on social media because of their lack of diversity, even though the area that they lived in was really lacking diversity, which is where they pulled their workforce from. So that CEO was frustrated and hurt. He didn't expect that at all, and whether it's he, she, whatever, that can be challenging in terms of transparency. The other thing is that really understanding as a leader what's confidential and what isn't. Even in conversations, stated confidentiality can help avoid some disruption. So confidentiality, again, in the context of transparency, there are lots of important and tough things that can be said in public, and there are some that aren't ever intended to be. So being aware of that. Patsy?
Yeah, and even on that note, as your organization grows and you have different layers in the organization, especially as you're developing your next level of leadership, who want to know as much as you're willing to give them,
Yep.
you have to be really discerning about what confidentiality at what level of the organization is appropriate. So I
Mhm.
greatly appreciate your saying that.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Patsy. So we know there's more. We'll keep working on hot communication, and there's a few things we just want to close with in getting practical. So let's get practical. One is intentionally promote safe psychological safety in communication. It doesn't just happen. Um, I mean, occasionally it happens when it's not intentional, but be intentional about promoting psychological safety. It really pays off. Our first step when we work with organizations, we come into organizations is to follow a process that intentionally creates safety and communication. And you can learn more about that from us, as we get to know each other. Um, check your core values, see if anything's missing. Maybe there's something that you never thought of, especially as the world keeps changing. um, Another is to demonstrate what you want. There's a lot of talk about living the core values, but you have to demonstrate that you want that and you welcome um, honest communication, that you're open-minded, that you're open-hearted, that you're transparency is important, and making things visible matters. um, so uh, remove the sometimes old language of not invented here, or we tried that and it didn't work. um, that can really shut down innovation and get in the way of hot communication. uh, and lastly, um, make what matters most visible. you know, there there's a lot of organizations we come in where things get visible. Scoreboards, themes, people have fun with it, but they know what's going on and they know how they're doing. And I'll close with this little story. When I was coaching a co-ed team in basketball, and my daughter was on the team, and she was in 6th grade, someone came up with the great idea of don't keep score in the game so the kids don't get overly competitive. And that totally didn't work, because it is a game and kids are competitive. And so there was always at least 2 kids on each bench, opposing teams, who always kept score. And every time
There's-
there was a timeout, they announced what the score was, and the parents would laugh. And that innovation didn't last too long. Patsy, anything else before we close?
Nope, I think you covered it for now.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for joining the Frustrated CEO on this topic of hot communication. And we look forward to having you tune in and share with your friends. Thanks so much.